If you walked on the shores of the Pacific Northwest today, you would hear the breeze from the ocean blowing through the trees and the sounds of waves crashing against the rocky shoreline. Many hundreds of years ago, these would not have been the only sounds you would have heard. You see, Native Americans settled on the Pacific Ocean front thousands of years ago. You would have heard the sounds of their voices, their songs, their music, and their lives. Say go scan and go. My name is Digali Wakwa. She sings. Or you can call me Joanne Shenandoah. I'm a Native American Wolf Clan member of the Oneida Nation, Iroquois Confederacy. Native Americans have lived on these lands for thousands of years. Today, I would like to share with you the story of the Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest. One way we've come to know about early Native American culture is through artifacts dug up by archaeologists. Artifacts are things like pottery, jewelry, and tools. By exploring artifacts left behind, we can learn a lot about what life was like for the first American people. You may wonder, how did the first Americans come to live on this land? Well, one theory scientists propose is that thousands of years ago, much of the northern hemisphere was covered with huge sheets of ice called glaciers. This was the Ice Age. The cold temperatures caused more and more water to freeze, and the level of the oceans dropped. When this happened, a land bridge crossing the sea between Northeast Asia and North America was revealed. Bison, caribou, and other large animals crossed over the bridge, and the Asian people who hunted these animals and depended on them to survive followed. The people settled all over North America and formed groups or nations, becoming the first Native Americans. Some of these people settled in deserts of the American Southwest. Others settled in the woodlands of the Northeast region of America. Still others settled on the Great Plains. And some people settled on the coast of the Northwest Pacific shores. Today we call these people the Native Americans of the Northwest. These people formed groups or nations with names like Tillamook, Haida, and the Coast Salish. These people settled in the Pacific Northwest region of North America. Villages were built near the Pacific Ocean, quiet bays and flowing rivers. Thick forests filled with redwood, fir, and cedar trees were close by. Snow-capped mountains rose into the sky. The weather was cool. It didn't get too hot in the summer, and winters were cold. Lots of rain fell from the clouds above. Nature provided plenty of everything the Northwest Native Americans needed: food, water, and wood for making houses, clothes, and tools. The land the Northwest people settled on provided plenty of food to eat. The oceans, bays, and rivers were filled with fish, seal, otters, shellfish, and crabs, so Northwest tribes mostly ate seafood. Salmon was a large part of their diet. Each spring, thousands of salmon would swim upstream in rivers. There were so many salmon that a man could catch enough to feed his entire family for 1 year. Men built long fences across the river made of tree saplings to catch the salmon. They also used nets and wooden traps. When the salmon were trapped, men would use spears to kill them. Fish eggs and fish oil were special treats. They were eaten at every meal. Women used them for cooking, seasoning, and medicine. Even though it was very dangerous, some natives hunted whales. A group of men would brave the ocean in a canoe. Once they found a whale, they used a harpoon to kill it. They used every part of every whale they hunted. The meat and skin were eaten. The blubber or fat was used for oil. The tendons were used to make rope. Northwest people also used the forests around them to hunt for food. Men used traps, clubs, and arrows to kill deer, elk, bears, and beavers. Their meat and fur were valuable to the nation. Women used the forest to gather wild berries, roots, and fruit. Northwest villages were built near oceans, bays, and rivers. A village always faced the water. Canoes were stored in front of the village across the sand. Behind the village houses were storage sheds for food, wooden sheds for smoking fish, and drying racks for drying fish. A village consisted of a series of plank houses built in a row. Plank houses were large, permanent homes built of wood from the surrounding forests. The frame of the house was constructed of large cedar trees. Logs and wood pegs were used as nails. Wooden planks were used for roofs. The planks overlapped to keep out the rain. Plank houses were 50 to 150 feet long and 20 to 60 feet wide. They were big enough for grandparents, parents, and grandchildren to live comfortably in. The leaders of the nation lived in the largest plank houses. The outside of a plank house was decorated with paintings and carvings. Inside, curtains made of woven mats hanging on rods separated the plank house into rooms. In the middle of the house was a sunken living room. In the center of the living room was a fire pit. Families used the pit to cook food and to gather around. There were no windows, but there was one hole in the ceiling for air. The ceiling was low, so the entire home would stay heated in the cool weather. The room in the very back of a plank house was usually reserved for the elders. This was the grandfather or grandmother. The grandfather was in charge of assigning each family member a space in the home. Woven mats were an important part of living in a plank house. They not only served as curtains, they were used as cushions to sit on, as towels, and they added color and decoration. Many of the houses of the Northwest people still stand today. Northwest people had a lot of leisure time because they didn't have to work very hard to search for food. With their extra time, they told stories, practiced weaving and carving wood, and held many social events. Northwest families loved to host celebrations called potlatches. They would spend months, sometimes years, preparing for one potlatch, and the entire village was invited. Potlatches were held to celebrate special occasions like a birth or marriage, and brought the family much respect. Guests would receive valuable gifts like fur or intricately weaved mats for coming. Sometimes the family would give away all of their possessions at one potlatch. The more they gave away, the wealthier they seemed, and the more respect they earned. Each member of the family played an important role. The grandfather was the head of the household. The men provided food by hunting and fishing. They also carved elaborate masks made of wood for ceremonies. Women were the homemakers. They kept the plank houses clean, washed clothes, and prepared all the food and meals. Women created a lot of the artwork. They wove baskets and mats and pounded cedar bark, to make clothing or boxes and baskets. They gathered berries from the forest and dug for clams in the sand. Girls grew up helping their mothers cook, clean, and make clothing. Fathers taught their sons how to provide for a family. Boys learned how to hunt and fish for food and how to chop down giant cedar trees for wood to build houses and canoes. They also learned the art of mass carving. Children didn't attend school. Instead, their elders taught them everything they needed to know. Learning the family history was an important part of growing up. Parents and grandparents would teach the family history through storytelling. They told the children the story over and over until the child memorized it. One day, they would share the story with their own children. Northwest culture reflected their history and the land around them. Totem poles stood outside every home and were important to the families. The large wood poles were carved to show humans, animals, and other creatures. Red, black, and white paint decorated these figures. Some stood 80 feet tall. The carvings and paint told a story about the family living inside. The story could be about a family's history or an important event. But life for Northwest Native Americans changed after the American Revolutionary War. Europeans started trading sea otter fur with the Northwest nations. At first, the fur trade was profitable for Europeans and the Native Americans. But after a while, the Europeans wanted more than sea otter fur. They wanted their land too. They started taking over villages. Lumber companies moved in and chopped down the forests. Fish canning factories were built. The Native people lost their land and their hunting and fishing grounds. The Europeans carried diseases like smallpox, measles, and the flu. Since the Native Americans had no immunity, thousands got sick and died. Entire families and nations were wiped out. Surviving children didn't have anyone to teach them family customs and traditions. Much of the Northwest culture was lost. It's important to know and understand the fascinating history of the Native American people. It's the story of their past, but it's also important to realize that today, many Native Americans don't live on reservations. They live in towns and cities just like you, and their lives are not much different than other Americans. What truly is important is that Native American people preserve their customs, culture, and spirituality, just like other American families preserve the customs and cultures passed down from their parents and grandparents. And even though the lifestyle of today's Native Americans has changed, they know the value of teaching the truth of their ancestors, the first Americans.